Welcome to the Nexxt podcast. I have a special guest today, Matthew Hatfield, Virginia Prep publisher, ESPN host. How you doing today, Matt?
James, it's a pleasure to be on with you, and I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Man, I can't complain. I know there's a lot of people at home always introduce me or ask me, have I met you? So I'm like, no, I haven't met him yet. So I know we had some mutual friends. So I was like, let me reach out to Matt and see if I can get him on the podcast. How you doing today?
Well, doing great. Likewise, I've heard a lot of glowing things about you from your days as a player at Indian River and then at Penn State, NFL with the Jaguars and so on and so forth. So it's a treat to finally get a chance to interact with you.
No, definitely, man. Always good to talk to someone back home and actually someone doing some good in the community, especially following the high school sports in Hampton Roads. I don't think you go anywhere on any college campus or any pro team. If you're a 757 guy, you represent 757.
Yeah, it's I've run into and gotten a chance to cover, interview so many athletes like yourself that have made it to the professional ranks, college, high school. And I think a lot of it is the 757 is so big because we don't have that major professional sports team. Granted, we do have the Norfolk Tides. We do have the Admirals hockey, and we have some, very passionate college fan bases, whether you're supporting Old Dominion, Norfolk State, Hampton, fill in the blank, whatever school it might be. And there's people that love Virginia Tech outside just the pocket of Tidewater. But I think that makes a lot of the high school athletes sort of megastars earlier than usual compared to some other portions of the country.
Right. I agree. And I have friends. It's funny being in Jacksonville. We have friends, Florida, obviously, right? You talk about high school sports. Florida is probably the mecca with Texas and, California and Ohio, Pennsylvania. But over the last 20, 25 years, I would proudly say that Virginia, you can stick Virginia in that top 8 to 10 teams or states in the country as well.
Yeah, our parent company, Rivals, which is owned by Yahoo Sports, which pretty much operates us at Virginia Prep. So I think a few years back, our national publishing team did like a little rankings of the states, and like you said, Florida, Cali, Texas are up there, and Virginia was right around 7 or 8 in the nation, which is not bad considering to be out of the 50 states to be in the top 10. We don't have maybe the resources that other states have to be there, and we've had, as you know this, because living here. It's such a transient military area. There's so much in and out. There's a lot of changes. There's been even more, I think, compared to when you played, coaching changes. There's not as much stability on that front, which might lead to some of the player movement, whether people believe it's good, better, and different. There is a lot more player movement than there was 10, 15, 20 years ago, and that's existing at the college level too, for that matter. But I think that's a good thing that we have Virginia being represented that well. And not just football. I think basketball, baseball, a variety of sports, track and field. We have so many athletes you put on the television or you get on the internet, you're hearing about Grant Holloway competing for a gold medal. You're watching NFL players like Josh Sweat or Jalen Holmes getting sacks. You're watching guys catch touchdown passes or make plays. Patrick Jones from Grassfield, the Vikings. Every time you turn on, and in baseball, you're watching Justin Verlander, though he's not from the 757. He played at Old Dominion, played at Goochland High School. He's winning the World Series. So it's like every year somebody's doing something from here in some kind of sport.
Right, and then you had in baseball, you had the Upton boys at one time.
Yeah.
You had
Upton, Zimmerman, Kadire, all of them. I mean, there's every year there's Daniel Hudson got the last out, and he went to Princess Anne High School. I mean, every year it feels like there's somebody in the postseason doing something. Brandon Lau from Nansemond River, Chris Taylor from Cox High and UVA with the Dodgers a couple years back. Right. So it's like every year, it's neat for me being a guy that does a radio show and covers sports. It's like, all right, we can get so-and-so because they just did something at whatever professional level. Right. There's always that connection that the fans can feel that attachment to, even though we don't have an NBA, an NFL, a major league team here in this market.
Right, and I think we thrive in, we thriving to get one, right? We want one so bad. And I think, like you said, high school sports and Old Dominion and Hampton and Norfolk State is, that is our pro, team, and that's our sports go-to along with, it used to be the Norfolk Tides. What are they called now?
They're still the Norfolk Tides. I mean, we had for a brief period of time, you remember we had like the Nighthawks football. We had the Virginia Beach Destroyers where Marty Schottenheimer, the late Marty Schottenheimer, was coaching it. But I think, too, James, the thing, when you played, you remember this, the Indian River Oscar Smith, that's a big rivalry. Hampton Phoebus, big rivalry. When the VHSL went to a classification shift to 6 divisions from the 3, from your playing days, it was AAA, AA, single. Now we have 6 divisions. I think some of the rivalries, they didn't necessarily break off, but come playoff time, you don't see Indian River and Oscar Smith square off, or Hampton and Phoebus square off. And in basketball, you don't see some of those Norfolk rivalries of a Maury Booker T or Granby Maury, whatever it might be, Nansemond River Kings Fork. So the rivalries exist, but you don't have them come playoff time. And even in college sports, because there's been so many conference changes, you don't always have Norfolk State and Hampton aren't in the same conferences anymore. Old Dominion's gone from the Sun Belt to the Colonial to Conference USA back in the Sun Belt. There's so many, and it's happening all the time in college sports with what's now, prevalent with name, image, and likeness and the transfer portal. There's so many changes. It's hard to keep up with the high school and college sports, all the movement with it, but people still love those hardcore rivalries. If you get, ODU JMU together, you get Norfolk State Hampton together, or whatever it be at the high school level, Hampton Phoebus, Bethel Hampton, Green Run Lansdowne. People love those rivalries, even if they're not playing for that same conference or division championship when the playoffs start.
Right, because I think it changed a little bit after I left when they started breaking up the conference. Because I think when we won it, I think we was Division 5A.
Yeah, Division 5. Yeah.
After we won it, I want to say maybe a year later, which would have been my senior year, it changed. So, and I want to say Indian River at the time, we was initially 6, and then we dropped down to 5, and then that was the year we won the state championship. And then I think the year later it went back up to 6, and now it's 5, but now it's totally different. Because back in the day, it was the Southeastern Conference, the Eastern Conference, and the Beach Conference. And now you could possibly have like state championship teams from 3 or 4 teams from the same conference.
Yeah, from the same district. You could say like Oscar Smith win Division 6 or Western Branch, Indian River win Division 5, Kingsport could win Division 4, and Lakeland could go win Class 3. And what's weird is there was a couple of years when they instituted that realignment change in 2013. They went to conference tournaments. So for like the winter and spring sports, you didn't even have a Southeastern District tournament. You'd have Conference 18, and it was like, what are you in? Are you in Region 4A South? And it was very confusing. I think it was well-intended, but it was somewhat flawed for certain parts of the state that didn't quite comprehend it or tackle it. We needed more time to tackle it properly. And I get why the VHSL did it, not to knock them. It's because Northern Virginia is growing at such an alarming rate compared to other parts of the state. And then people in the southwestern part of the state, western part of the state, it wasn't equal for the enrollment. So there are some good reasons for it, but there are also a lot of people that don't quite grasp it or like it. And as we all are, we're all creatures of habit. I'm not one that loves change, and some of us don't like change. Sometimes we have to get adapted and get used to change. And that doesn't just happen at the high school level. It's happening in collegiate sports and also at the professional level. Right.
And when you're talking about, Northern Virginia, I live in Northern Virginia. So, it's a high school on every corner. Right. And my son, we live in Dumfries, Virginia. So my son just got to 9th grade, and he had a choice to choose from 3 different high schools that he wanted to go to. So, because that's how close. So I live right across, like literally a mile from Freedom High School, who just won the state championship. Right. And then
they were stacked.
And the first time I seen them was against Western Branch. So I had a bunch of friends came from home. They was like, yo, let's go see the Western Branch and Freedom game. Have you seen Freedom? I heard they good. And I was like, I haven't seen them. My son don't go there, so I haven't seen them. Yeah. So then I went out there and watched them. I was like, whoa, like
different team.
No one's going to beat them.
Yeah, it's funny. I spoke with their coach, Joel Overton, before the season, and he was just, he said, if our new quarterback steps into this role, and he did really well, Tristan Evans, he set records from the previous QB in Quest Powell. He says, we have a chance to be really special. And I saw them early in the season against Stonebridge, who, as you know, up there in Ashburn, just a well-oiled machine. Mickey Thompson does a marvelous job. They had won back-to-back state championships. And Stonebridge had a couple of guys out, so I knew it could get away from them. But I was most impressed, not with the speed and skill position kids, because I knew how good they were. I haven't watched them on film and seen them and covered them for a few years. But I was impressed at their line and how physical their defensive front was, because sometimes against those speed teams that have athletes that are more finesse, you could say, all right, we'll keep the game close because in the trenches, we're going to make this a war. And you couldn't just push those guys around up front. And they stack up with some of the better teams I've seen here lately in Virginia high school sports. Even some of those dominant teams in Toddwater, like the Phoebus and Hampton groups, the Lansdowne team that won it, the Oscar Smith team that won it. And the scary part is, as you probably well know, most of their better guys are underclassmen coming back next year. And now Highland Springs, who's been a dynasty under Lauren Johnson, former Virginia Tech Hokie, and his son Braylon's going there. He's got a younger son, and Brennan Johnson, who was just a dynamite linebacker. They're moving up to Division 6, and despite graduating about 30 seniors, that could be an absolute epic battle if we get a Freedom Highland Springs game. Problem is, unless they change it, James, it'll be in the state semis, not the state championship. And that's my whole argument is we want the two best teams. I don't care if you're from Tidewater, Richmond, Nova. I want the two best teams playing at the end, not in the semis or quarter round. It's almost like you could say in the NFL, well, we think the Bills and the Chiefs are the two best teams. I want them in the Super Bowl. Well, that's a little different. But you want the two best teams playing in the last round if you can help it. And I think they should allow that to be, once you start the playoffs, seed them. Go 1 through 4. I mean, I think that's the fairest way to do it, as opposed to saying we need to have someone represented from each part of the state. Well, you're in the states. I want the two best teams at the end.
Right. And I think, it's even when you're looking at the way that the college football playoff is going, that's, in my opinion, I think that's totally messed all up. I think you need a better way to do it, even if they adapt, take the top 10 or top 12 teams in the country at the end of the year. Because I don't feel like you get a true champion, right? So,
well, I mean, let's be honest here. I know they lost 2 close games and may not have been deserving from their entire body of work, but I honestly felt that Alabama was the best team I saw end of the year. I know they lost those games to LSU. They could have lost to Texas A&M, and they also lost the close game to Tennessee. But I think if you put them on a neutral field right now tonight against TCU or Georgia, whether they win it or favorite, I think they got a great shot if they got Will Anderson and Bryce Young playing. And I mean, certainly people are going to, you can make a case for anybody on a given night. You can make a case for your Nittany Lions, who played great in the Rose Bowl. I mean, you can make a case for a lot of different teams, and it's so evenly matched. I think 12's too many. I would be more in favor of 6 or 8 because, as you know, you let some of these college athletes play 18, 19 weeks in a season. That's very taxing on the bodies, unless you take away a regular season week, which those other schools that aren't going to be in it are going to say, we don't want that because that's revenue for us. So you're in a tricky spot with it.
Do you take away the conference championship games?
Well, I mean, you could, and it's almost like some of these bowl games. What's the meaning in totality? The thing is, the people that are involved that'll say that's revenue. You have television involved, that's revenue. So the answer to all the questions come back to money. It's all about money at the end. Yep. So
it's all about money.
But I think we have to be very careful, especially when you watch what unfortunately happened in the NFL a week ago with DeMar Hamlin. Thank goodness he's doing better, and all the prayers continue to go for him. I mean, player safety needs to be of the utmost importance here. You can't have some of these college athletes, and I know now they're getting the opportunity to market themselves and profit to an extent, but playing 19, 20 games, if you have like 4 rounds of playoffs, that's a lot. And how do you squeeze that in that condensed amount of time? I mean, some of these pros can't even do it. That's why they're arrested week 18. Let's be real here.
Right. I mean, I think, I agree, totally agree. So, I know in the Big Ten, in most conferences, they play 3 non-conference games. So do we take away the non-conference games and then, maybe do an 8 game regular season, 8 to 10, and then from there, try to figure out a way to do playoffs? Because I just don't think. Every year it seemed like someone getting left out that possibly could be in. Because and I'm biased, but I really thought at the end of the season, Penn State was probably one of the top 5 teams in the country. Because, the way if you look at the way we played Ohio State, we dominated that game until the last 4 minutes of the game. And then I turned around like we lost by 20 points. We've been up the whole game by 20 points. And it was, it was within like 3 or 4 plays. The next thing you know, we was down. Michigan, they beat us. They just manhandled us from up front. And it was from the beginning, they was just more physical. But the Ohio State game, I thought we gave that game away. And the way they played against Utah in the Rose Bowl, that's a good young team. I mean, they young. We they got, the kids from Hampton Roads, both kids over at Hampton Roads, they both played great. In the Rose Bowl.
Keandre Lambert and Katron Allen were both great. Yeah.
And Katron, right. And I've been pushing Katron all year. And it's funny because I kind of had a conversation with some people on the staff. And if you looked at it and I understand how it worked, being a Pennsylvania kid for the other kid, Nick Singleton. And the media was pushing Nick, keep pushing. And I was like, look, I need to make sure that Katron understand is an equal playing field, because now it's kind of looking like, one kid is being favored over the other one.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to see how this all will play out in the coming years. I had an industry source. He's actually a pro scout on the basketball side of things. He told me about 4 or 5 years ago, right before COVID happened in the pandemic, he was predicting and forecasting that there was going to be huge seismic shifts in college athletics, and this would affect both football and basketball to the point where we would see literally the majors and mid-majors for basketball split apart, because in football, you really don't get that chance for a VCU, the George Masons, the Butlers of the world. I mean, Tulane was a great story, beating USC in the bowl game, coming back, from a big deficit on a night when the Heisman player, day of the Heisman Trophy winner, Caleb Williams, had phenomenal stats. They pulled it out, crazy ending in that game. But you don't get that team from the group of five, if you will, not the outside the Power Five, get a chance to win it. But I think we're going to break apart from having those schools get the chance, be it even in some non-conference games or in a postseason situation. And, that's why I think people have wondered in our state, like James Madison and Old Dominion in recent years, making that move up from FCS 1AA to FBS 1A football. And James Madison's done it pretty well. Old Dominion played in the bowl game a year ago, but it's so tough to compete with those other schools, particularly now where those Power 5 programs have greater resources for NIL, greater resources to go pigeon that player from, or pluck that player from the school that's not at the ACC, Big Ten, SEC level, and that's the tough part about it. So I think we're getting to a point where you might see they'll have their own separate tournament and postseason opportunity, and then some of those other schools will come back down almost like to 1AA, so to speak. And how that is all pretty much sorted out will be the interesting part.
Right, agree. And I feel like I was having a conversation with some people probably a couple of months ago when they first announced that USC and UCLA going to join the Big Ten. Like, how is that going to happen? Like, you're talking about Penn State having to go on a West Coast swing to play, on a Saturday to play USC or UCLA. I mean, are they going to stay out there to play for 2 weeks, or how is it going to go? You're talking about having to, factor in the fact that the kids going to have class, traveling from one coast to another coast, and, that turnaround time. So it'll be interesting, because I just saw it earlier today, actually. 2024, I think they said it was supposed to be finalized.
I will say this too. I have a greater appreciation now for what you all have gone through as student athletes. And I say that because these last 2 years I've been privileged to be the play-by-play radio voice for Old Dominion women's basketball. And I used to have a friend who passed away years ago due to cancer, the late, great Terry Sisiski. He was the play-by-play voice at VCU and at Petersburg High School. And he's done some of my tournaments. He was just a wonderful man with so much energy, and he would prepare like nobody else. He'd get to games 20 hours before it tipped, if you will. But he always used to tell me, Matthew, I hate waking up some of these mornings in different cities and hotels, not knowing where I am. And having experienced some of that travel, and I think we should make all media members go through this, by the way. Once you go through this travel and you see how the student athletes live, it's not a cupcake picnic life. You've dealt with it. I think people that are the common viewers and observers of this think, well, they're getting, and there are a lot of perks to it. Don't get me wrong. You're getting a lot of meals, you're getting things taken care of, but the travel can be exhausting on you when you're stuck in airports or you're stuck in different places, and then you have to do different things that are required of you. It's not all roses and everything's simple, because they have real life problems. There are some things that make it tough to navigate. And I've got a greater appreciation for it now, having lived it on a different scale as a broadcaster, not as an athlete, to see it more up close and personal, because you realize some of the ththings that everybody goes through. And it's like, there is some challenges and obstacles with all this. Yeah,
I used to tell my friends all the time, they'll make jokes like, you guys get everything. And I'm like, look, we do, and, deservedly so. And I was like, look, you're talking about, let's look at the kids' schedule during the season, right? I say, my schedule we was up at 4:30 every day. So you still sleeping till 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I done went through a full day by the time you even rolled over and got up. And then I still got to go to class and still got to go to practice. And then whenever that block, where you got practice, you can't have classes scheduled. So then I got to go to class at night. So, I might have to take a night class and finish at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. Then I got to be up again, first thing in the morning, at 4:30 in the morning, not including, my personal life, college student, want to go out with your friends to hang out. So I was like, it's tough. It's real tough, and you got to be disciplined.
What you just said, too, is another thing. I had someone in the business tell me, like, when you're in the business, this is more applicable, I think, to the athletes and coaches necessarily than maybe someone like me that's a broadcaster. But you're now personal life. This becomes your life. And the ones that are most successful at it, you're the best at your time management, how you handle things, be it at the professional level, college sports. I mean, you're pretty much, holidays, weekends, those different things go out the window, because you're constantly in film prep, you're in scout prep, you're in shoot around, you're in this practice and that. You're constantly getting ready for whatever game you have. And you have to have that competitive edge to stay afloat because it can go sideways or south in a hurry. And you've seen it. You've seen it at both the pro and the college levels, James. I mean, it is tough if you hit a skid to get back on track. It's easier to go south quicker than it is to get out of a funk.
Right.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And Joe Paterno was mastermind at it. I mean, he made sure we all. Even if it was in the summertime, everyone had to take summer classes. So it was everyone was going to get ahead, right? So everyone had to take summer classes. You chose one. It's two sessions. You choose one. You can go to both if you want, but you're definitely going to one of them. And that way, that kind of gave everybody, over 3 years, that's basically 4 years of school, right? So if you went to summertime every year and you loaded up, took 2 or 3 classes over the summertime. He was also good at coming down in Hampton Roads recruiting. And, it's funny, I had a conversation with someone on the staff at Penn State last year. It was like, look, we did some research and, over the years, Joe always got top talent out of Hampton Roads, and we just haven't been able to do that in the last couple of years. And they trying to figure out how can they get back down there. And I was like, you got to build relationships. I know one thing Joe did, he spoke at the Norfolk Sports Club every year. So he built that relationship with the coaches down there and the sports people, media. So when he went down there, he had, people that he would call, friends that he could call, talk to, and those guys was probably talking on his behalf as well. If they met a kid that could play and was trying to decide to go somewhere. And I think that's a big important thing too. So.
I think they're getting turned around to an extent. I mean, looking at our rivals' top rankings, I think 4 of the top 10 players in the state are going there with Alex Birchmeyer, the offensive lineman from Broad Run, Tony Rojas, who's a stud athlete from Fairfax, was offensive and defensive player of the year in his region, going to go up there as a linebacker. They've also got Kavion Keys from Verona, who they got to flip from North Carolina, who's also got skills that could translate to either side of the football as a linebacker or even a pass-catching receiver. And then Matthias Mega Barnwell, who I remember before he went to Riverbend High School in Fredericksburg, was at Spotsylvania, and his assistant coach sending me film of just how ginormous his hands were and just how he was a freak of nature. Now he's 6'6", like 265, and he's a tight end that can probably catch, block, and do a lot of different things there with him. But I think they're making progress. They've got to continue to make more inroads in Tidewater and Richmond, especially now that UVA and Virginia Tech have had some coaching changes. They've not been able to mop up to the way they did in years past when you had George Welsh at UVA or Frank Beamer at Virginia Tech. Still some relatively new coaches there with Brent Pry at Virginia Tech and with Tony Elliott at UVA. But one thing I will say, too, is you mentioned about the Joe Paterno piece. James Franklin years ago went to those satellite camps when Bobby Wilder was the head coach at Old Dominion, and there wasn't much interaction. I don't know if some of it was because of NCAA rules and policies, but I just felt like there was almost this guard up, whether it was him intentionally or just what was in place. So there wasn't as much meet and greet where you could have the interaction with fans. Then you have the break for a lot of new coaches with COVID where you're doing anything, virtually and not face-to-face masking. So I think that's made it tough to kind of build some of that. And some of that's just going to need to go the extra mile to get to that point. But I'd love to see how Joe Paterno, if he was still here, God rest his soul, how he would deal with Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and all those things, because it'd be funny to see how he'd deal with all that.
Not too well. Not well at all. It was so funny because he used to tell her, they was like, our class was, the LeVar Arrington class, our rookie, our freshman year. And they used to say, I thought that class was going to kill Joe. It was just the personalities and just, different personalities and young team. And it was high expectations and everybody was expecting to play and wanted to play. And he didn't believe in playing freshmen. So, it's kind of like you have, we had the number 1 class in the country. And I think out of our class, only 3 of us didn't redshirt. And that was me, LeVar, and Kareem McKenzie. Obviously, LeVar was the second pick in the draft. And Kareem McKenzie and I both were 3rd round draft picks. And, but that class was loaded and everybody think they could play. Right. So it's just like, we're not red shirt. What are you talking about? I'm playing.
Yeah. Nowadays, if you're not playing, you're bolting, you're hitting the transfer portal. I mean, it's amazing how much it's hard to keep up with. I joked when it first happened that, and I said this even when I first started covering high school sports in 2004, is that we need a transactions page. We used to have in the newspaper, the Toronto Blue Jays signed this outfitter, the Cleveland Cavaliers traded for this point guard. We need a transactions page, James, to keep up with all this, because even if you do, it's still hard to manage. I mean, I'm watching a team play and I'm like, oh, I forgot he was there. Like, you forget completely.
How do you feel about the transfer portal?
I do think that athletes should have the right to go somewhere, but I don't see why we've let it get to the point where, and I think the ship has sailed. I don't know how you fix it. It used to be you sat out a year, and there has to be better restrictions and regulations to manage this, because now you're seeing constantly all kinds of things. You're hearing stories, some of which you don't know if they're true or not true, about how athletes are now being steered to certain schools.
Right.
You have certain boosters getting involved. I think it's gotten out of hand. And I mean, quite frankly, there needs to be better leadership at the NCAA. And I think sports need to have a czar that's in charge of this to manage this and have better policies in place. I mean, just recently I was watching, I think, PTI with Kornheiser and Wilbot, and I saw the story pop up about Jim Harbaugh being investigated. And Kornheiser had a funny line. He said, "Wait a second, I thought everything was legal now. You play how are you being investigated?" And he said it tongue in cheek, but it was almost like, yeah, how do you get a violation nowadays with all the things that are going on? I mean, years ago, you could understand it, but now it's become the phrase that's constantly being used by media members, fans, even coaches, is it's the wild, wild west. And I think we have to not let it get to that point to where it's a farce and a joke and it's not taken seriously. We have to get back on a serious page, but also allow and give the athletes a certain leeway to say, all right, if you don't like where he is, we're going to give you an opportunity to explore your options elsewhere. But there also has to be, if you leave, just like I think college coaches, I mean, they can just get up and leave like that. But sometimes we have to have something in place where if you're transferred from this school within the ACC to this school in the ACC and you're just eligible to play, and 5 months later, that just doesn't seem right with me.
Right. I mean, my thing is, I think about it when I was in school. If the transfer portal was there, what I had left, halfway through my freshman year when I was feeling like, okay, I'm better than these other guys playing safety position, right? And I felt like, no matter what, he's not going to play me as much. What I have left, because I called my mom. It was like, look, I think I'm going to call Coach Mac Brown and transfer. She was like, no, you're not. She's like, you're going to sit right there and play and finish. You just got there, give it some time. And I felt like if I could, if at this point in time, today, where it is, I would have transferred. And I think a lot of kids would. And that's my thing with it, because I feel like, just because it goes their way, they gonna get up and go. Right. And I think every kid in America going from every 4 or 5 star kid in America that's going to a major university think he's supposed to be playing right away. Right. And so then the second part of it is, you're going to have a kid that keep transferring. You're going to have a lot of kids that don't graduate. Yeah. You're going to have a lot of kids.
Thing. I think we could have had this in place where, and I don't know how you phrase this, word this, execute it, but I would like to see more of the NIL perks with the incentive of getting your degree in graduation. I have no problem with athletes being compensated, especially for their likeness. And we see coaches everywhere make all kinds of money. Why can't they get that opportunity? But there needs to be an incentive to stay in the school, to get your education, get your degree, because the air does go out of the ball at some point. Now, you say all that, which is interesting, makes me wonder, do you think had you left, and we don't know this for sure one way or the other, but you think it would have played out for you similarly? Would you have gone and been a 3rd round draft pick by the Jaguars? It's hard to project that or know, but
right.
Yeah.
Right. It's funny because I was talking to James Whitley a couple of weeks ago, and he said the same thing. We was talking, and we both started laughing because he thought about leaving Michigan, going back to UNC, and he had obviously Dre was there, so we all know each other, was from home, so that would have probably made it a lot easier. Especially Dre had just came off of leading the country in interceptions, so now you're talking about all 3 of us being able to play hindsight 2020 after the fact. To go together, then, I think it would have been fun.
Yeah, we see a lot of that in recruiting where you'll get those. I think UNC's had that lately, that pipeline in 757. Virginia had that with Mike London. They were getting all these 4 or 5 star level guys, the Eli Harolds, the Smoke Mizels, the Quinn Blannings, the Andrew Browns. I think there's, part of that goes back to that 757 brotherhood or tight, knit community, whether it be in Tidewater or elsewhere. And I think there's some pros and cons to that. But this whole NIL thing has made it just completely different now. And, it used to be you interview players, what do you like about this school? I just recently had for the first time, I won't say which athlete, James, they said, well, wherever I can get the best NIL deal was his exact answer to me.
Right.
And he was being honest, but I'm like saying to myself, wow, I didn't think 5-10 years ago this would ever even be a talking topic or never entered my mind.
I saw something the day the transfer portal opened up. And they had a list of kids that was entering the portal, and they had one kid. I want to say he was from was transferring from Alabama. He had a NIL value of $2.4 million. I'm like, hold up. He has a $2.4 million NIL value. Why is he leaving?
Yeah,
he got to be playing. So why is he leaving? And then who gave him that value? How do you justify paying a kid that type of money? And Joe Paterno used to talk about this years ago. Look, I agree. I think kids should be paid. It's just, how do we pay them? Because it's going to it can get to, like you say now, it's the wild, wild west. So how do we monetize it, or how do we regulate it to make sure everybody getting an equal amount of money?
Well, what you're saying is so interesting because we bring up topics like this on my radio show all the time. My co-host is an old school, longtime veteran basketball coach who's closing in on 500 wins. And we like to have friendly banter back and forth. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree. And he's like, there was a story about some 14-year-old who was getting an NIL deal. And he's like, this is absurd. This is crazy. And I said, you know what? You're right. But I said, you know what? It isn't his fault. It's the system's fault.
The system.
Don't blame the 14-year-old. Blame the crazy people. If that dealership wants to pay him, that's their cuckoo problem. And it isn't the 14-year-old's fault. It's them. I think it's insane that you've got some car dealership in Mobile or wherever it is wanting to give $2.5 million to some 14-year-old that can dunk a basketball, go 85 yards for a touchdown. But you know what? That's their prerogative and their problem. Don't blame the 14-year-old or his parents. Now, at that point, how they handle it, that's a different story. But it's amazing that some of these people involved, it's taken on a life of its own. And you do wonder about the risk because you've seen it up close and personal, some of the horror stories that come out of this and pro athletes that get these huge contracts and then they can't survive it. And they're on TV years later that are broke and they had poor management or people took advantage of them. And you do worry, concern yourself, because one of the things I was just talking about this with a friend of mine the other day is I think every school should have, if you want to get into broadcast or communications, there should be a class in high school that allows you to do that with some of these, all these games being streamed now.
Right.
It doesn't have to be a professional like me. It could be anybody that wants to help nurture them or tutor them along the way. And secondly, there should be I call it almost a money class that basically teaches how you deal with your finances, and more than some of these other classes that I think we have in place as credits to get, for your courses to qualify, and you don't use half of the things that you're sitting there. It's like, we need to have basically how you deal with finances and things of that nature and different things for whatever your field's going to be. I think that would help before you even get into college at the high school level to accelerate that process. So we don't get to a point where they're 21, 22 years old and you have guys and gals that end up broke because they weren't taught and didn't have the right, mentorship and guidance along the way. I
agree. I think that's probably 40 years past due. Making sure they had something in place to making sure the guys, because I said that once the NIL started, okay, they need to make sure these kids are paying taxes on this money. Because at the end of the day, if it's, that's basically their own business, right? So they're gonna have to file taxes at the end of the year. So I hope someone's helping these kids, with that, make those decisions. Because I remember talking to a few guys at one or two different universities, and I spoke to our guy at Penn State who ran the NIL. He's the director of NIL. Early in the summertime, might have been like beginning of the year last year. And I know he was telling me that and in Pennsylvania, every state was different, and they wanted to regulate it in Pennsylvania. They didn't, and he was like, we want to regulate it on the point of, we want to know who on our campus. We want to know who's around our kids. We want to be able to sit in when they sitting down talking to these people, because they kids, they don't know what's going on. Right. We want to be able to have someone look over the contracts that they, the offers. And now it's different. Now it almost seems like a lot of the universities have put their big money donors in a bucket and kind of formed their own thing. So now that these boosters are involved in it, and they just saying they NIL deals.
Yeah.
And
it's not just even at the high school and college levels, this transition from high school to college. And it's always, the speed of the game is one thing when you go from senior in high school to freshman in college and how you adapt to the pro level. But we're seeing not just college have to deal with the transfer and NIL and how high school athletes, how do you get yourself prepared for that? College athlete signs with this Power 5 school is already getting thrown in this NIL deal, no, whatsoever as far as, intel on how to handle it all. But the professional leagues, look at them. I was on Twitter the night of the injury. I didn't see it happen first with Damar Hamlin, the Bills and Bengals. And there are people, these are human beings now, that are complaining because they're in a fantasy football championship, or this is honestly going to truth, James, because they have wagers on the games. Am I going to take my parlay? But now the league, which used to years ago with Jimmy DeGreek frown upon any point spread, you can't watch a game without a commercial for any company. It's constant. And whether you believe it or not, there are constant things that, and now you can reach out to an athlete and tweet at him or message him or her and have that. It's a scary world that we live in with some of that. And I know it goes back to what I said earlier. It's all about the almighty dollar because the leagues see the profit of that. And it's just exploded to a different animal now where it's, I wouldn't have imagined it 5-10 years ago. I know you probably wouldn't have either when you were playing.
No, definitely not. And speaking of the Hamlin injury, I didn't see it either. I was at the Rose Bowl. So it's funny because it started raining a little bit. And so me and my wife kind of started walking to the car, then it stopped. So then we came back. So we actually missed it. So then everybody started talking about it that was around us. So I kind of tried to go on my phone and see it. And how when you get in them stadiums, your phone don't really work good. So I ended up going to YouTube and I seen it on YouTube.
I saw it on Twitter.
Right, because they wasn't showing it on they wasn't going to show it on TV again. So it was, when you seen it, you immediately thought, okay, they had to give him CPR, something wrong, something serious wrong, right? So that was a scary situation. But even going back to this transfer portal, I think when you're looking at the transfer portal, a lot of these high school kids are being it's hurting them. Because a lot of the kids, especially if they 3 stars, they picking these universities picking people out of the transfer portal, and it's putting a lot of these kids that betweener, keeping them in a whole situation to the universities figure out who they're going to get out of these transfer portals.
Well, I think when it first happened, covering both football and basketball, it was definitely more damaging to those high school athletes. I felt so bad at the basketball level that were seniors because during that COVID frame, and then this was all happening, you were pretty much, if you weren't a top-ranked guy or gal in 150, 250 in the country, you could pretty much hang up your hopes of going Division I to an extent, which made one of the stories from our area so amazing. There was a young man at Green Run named Elijah Kennedy. He's now at Texas State, but he was getting no Division I looks whatsoever. 6'4" shooting guard. He actually suffered a horrific knee injury at the Norfolk Scope when he slipped in a regional playoff game. He played with Boo Williams on the travel circuit for the spring and summer and really took off. He was going to go to a post-grad prep school, and then he got Florida. And it's like pretty much if you go from nothing Division I, having I think your only offer was like Radford essentially, and all of a sudden you have Florida recruiting you, not to say you should pick them over Duke or Kentucky or North Carolina, but what else can you pretty much ask for a kid who's going to try to post-grad and prep to get some mid-major plus opportunities? He went there. They had a coaching change. Head coach at Florida goes to Georgia in the SEC. Very strange that happens. That doesn't hardly happen ever. You leave from there to there. He ends up at Texas State. But he was a rare exception. That's like that happens one in we talk about the gambling. It's one in the odds are plus 10,000 essentially, right? It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. So the odds are so insignificant. Football, you have more athletes as far as the roster goes. You have up to 50 athletes as opposed to 12. But now we're seeing, and I've even heard it out of college coaches' mouths. I'm sure you have too. Well, I don't know if I want that tweener 3-star running back slot kid because we go get someone out of the portal from a MAC school, as opposed to that kid who's being – and then the other question, this is what bugs me the most, is when I hear a college coach say, well, who else has offered him? I hate that because it's like if he can play or she can play, go get him. It shouldn't matter about who else has offered him. And honestly, if the film doesn't lie, if what you see on film or you see in person evaluating at a camp trust your eyes. Don't go off what someone else says necessarily. I mean, you can use that as part of your evaluation, learning about the character, the grades, what's he like if you're talking to a custodian, whoever, guidance counselor. But so many, when I hear that, it makes me just like want to scream and pull my hair out, because who else is offering them? That doesn't matter now, because we see now with the way they're going up and down in the portal, the levels are so out of whack with players. And even whether you're a ranking service and you believe in them or not, or whoever, the levels go where you're wanted and where you can play and can contribute. It shouldn't matter about who else has offered you and how many offers you have.
I agree. I don't even understand how the rankings go. The 4 and 5 star rankings, I was told by one parent, if his kid went to a camp and he was recognized at more than one camp, then he should be a 3-star. So I don't even know how it worked. So, and who actually ranking them?
Well, I can't speak for all of us at Rivals. I mean, they value some of my input for it. Sometimes they don't. But I do know that sometimes when they can evaluate against other level ranked guys in a camp setting or combine, that matters. To me, I'm one that wants a variety of factors. And I'd say this even with basketball. I'm not going to necessarily quantify you greater because I saw this in AAU in comparison to high school. I'm looking at what do I see as a player, what translates, what do I like that I see. I mean, I think now the question is, and this, college coaches will interact and say, what do you think about this player? They're looking for more reasons why not to recruit an athlete than why to recruit an athlete, because they're worried about their own jobs and their security of if I'm in the SEC and Arkansas is recruiting this, wide receiver and he's 6'2" and he's better than the 5'11" kid, I'm going to take the 6'2" kid, but the 5'11" kid's faster. I mean, there's so many different variables and factors with it. I'm one that when I see certain things on film, and there's some players even in our own system, I'll be like, I'm amazed this one's not ranked higher. One that I loved, and we all have misses. It's just like the NFL draft. The executives miss on players all the time. I mean, Kurt Warner doesn't get drafted. Tom Brady gets drafted in the 6th round. They're both Super Bowl MVPs. Go figure, right? List goes on and on. But like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah at Bethel, who's now with the Cleveland Browns, I love this game. I watched him in 2 sports, and I think multiple sports is a good thing. Some coaches are against having their athletes do it, but I watched him in basketball shut down a guard who's one of the leading scorers in Hofstra history, and nobody else would shut that kid down. And he just had a certain presence about him on and off the court. His intelligence was there, so he had an IQ for the game. And he had a competitive edge. And, if you have certain qualities and intangibles to go with the athletic traits and qualities that you need, special things can occur for you. And I watched it in him at high school, and he's been terrific in the NFL with the Browns. And there were people that had questions about him at the draft process about his medical. He slipped from a first-round grade as an ACC Defensive Player of the Year at Notre Dame because there was a medical question, which is – and you almost can't fault certain teams if there's something there, because that can be the difference between that GM and that person in the front office keeping their job or losing their job. So it's a constant battle, and I think it's such an inexact science. So the fans that say, "Oh, this is easy," the one thing I will say in defense of our recruiting services is you hear more about the ones that don't make it than the 5 stars that were number 1 picks and number 2 picks. There's more of those that hit than ones that don't. And then and sometimes, to be honest with you, though, not to also to go the other way. Sometimes there's a 6'4", 200-pound athlete that even the guy on the street that doesn't know anything about football can tell you, well, that guy's different because he's a different breed. So sometimes those guys aren't hard to pick out anyways. Right.
I mean, some of the guys is obvious, right? And then some of the guys, you got to actually really go out there and do your Ozzie Newsome, I call it. Because while being around college and football in general, I feel like Ozzie Newsome over the last 2 or 3 decades has been fabulous. The best evaluator.
He's been fabulous. Yep. I think the Ravens and Steelers, if you look at drafts, have generally done the best. I mean, it's hard to question what they do. Some people say the Patriots too. I think it's a little bit up and down depending on what year it is. But the Ravens and Steelers seem to have had the most success, and for the most part, consistency in drafts. It's hard to question what those franchises have done because the proof's in the pudding. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't hard to pick out how good Ronald Curry was in high school, or Percy Harvin, or probably D'Angelo Hall from your era. That's one of the guys that are easy to figure out. Dre Bly, he's pretty easy to figure out how good he is. So,
yeah, and it's funny because talking about those guys, like. I just remember playing, and we could have named any team that we was playing against. We played Green Run. You had Plex and Lanier, and you had Cedric Warren, We go to Deep Creek, they had Deion Dyer. Western Branch had Dre Bly. It just depends. Then you're talking about basketball, going to Churchland, playing Marvin Rogers and Mike Holland and all those guys. You went to Booker T.
Mike Holland's now coaching. Coaching. How about that?
I know.
Yeah.
Going to Booker T. Actually, I don't know if you hear, rest in peace to Kenny Brown. He passed away over a couple of days ago. So, I can remember playing Booker T in high school. My freshman year is 97-98 is the final score. Standing room only at Indian River. They beat us by 1 point. So then we went to Booker T and played them and lost by like 3 points, 90-something and 95. And then we played them again in the playoffs, and then we knocked them out the playoffs. So, it was some epic battles. Then, I seen the Iverson versus Joe Smith battle. Like, obviously, Alonzo Mourning went to Indian River, obviously, right? So he was a little older. So just watching Zoe play at Georgetown and then in Miami, and it's just been a lot of memories, a lot of good guys coming out of Hampton Roads.
Yeah, we just had the Hatfield basketball coach, Carlos Poindexter. Shout out to them. They just had 40 straight wins. It was snapped recently. They won the state championship in Class 6 of it. He'd asked me about teams in the longest win streaks in the history of the state. And Alonzo's team in the 80s had one of the longest win streaks in the state. And Moses Malone's Petersburg team. And it's like when you're on a list with those teams, pros that were Hall of Famers, it's not a bad thing. The one thing that does make me sometimes, it grinds my gears to an extent with is, and what you're saying, it's so neat to go back and watch some of these old battles. I love how the Chesapeake channel or the Hamptons channel, when you go on YouTube and you can find some of these old games, because I get mesmerized by them because I wasn't covering back then, but it's neat to watch some of the battles, even if it is VCR-ish type of quality. It's still neat to see. Like you go, wow, Ronald Curry was a different dude. People always say who would win in a battle with him and Percy Harvin, or who was better. You're comparing eras. It's just like people that say who's better between LeBron and Jordan, or Wilt and Russell and Shaq, or, Montana and Brady, fill in the blank, whatever it is, Barry Sanders and this running back. Anyways, so the one thing that bugs me, though, is I do feel like you can go to any school in the area, particularly in Tidewater and certain parts of Virginia, if you want to go to 804 or Nova, and you can get recruited wherever you are. If you're on a 2-8 team or a 10-0 team, and now I feel like whether there are people that are outside influences, folks on the street that are steering certain kids to go to a certain school because they're looking for their own personal gain out of it, which is unfortunate and seedy to me. You can stay at whatever school, go show some loyalty and go win wherever you're at. You don't have to join an all-star team and go get recruited that way, because guess what? College coaches don't care where you're at. They're going to recruit you if you can help them win games. They don't care about what colors you're wearing. They care about their own jobs. They don't care about if you're winning a championship. Now, do they want to get players from winning programs? Sure. But there's also another way to look at it. If you transfer somewhere else, are you going to bolt on me? Where's your loyalty? So I feel like there's a misconception out there that, well, you have to go to a school that wins to get recruited. No, you don't. I'm more impressed if you help your school that's struggling to win because you went the harder way to get it done. I agree.
I totally agree. And that's that LeBron James effect.
They see what the pros are doing. So it's hard to blame kids for that. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because speaking of Ronald Carey, I want to say my senior year, we had just won the state championship. They won the state championship my junior year. So going into the senior year, they scheduled us. They scheduled us when the schedules first came out, and then they took us off the schedule before the season started. So we was pissed. So we only played 9 games that year. We was pissed. We was like, well, we know why they took us off, because they didn't want that loss on their record, and we had no doubt that we was going to go over there and beat them. And we had been trying.
Never knew that.
Right. Yeah, we ended up my senior year. We ended up having 9 games, and that was because they took us off the schedule, and we was kind of pissed.
Which is unfortunate. This year we had a couple of area schools in Tidewater. Oscar Smith only played 9, and Maury played 8. And I think it would have been neat to have those two schools played each other. The dates worked out. Yeah, it could have easily been done on a neutral site if there was any, and I don't know if there was any dispute about if the game was going to be at Smith or game be at Maury, but go play the game at the Virginia Beach Sportsplex for all we know. And, I'm sure folks would even put a portion of the proceeds to charity. Like, let's do it it should be about the kids. It shouldn't be about own people's personal gripes or any personal, I don't want to play them because this guy, put that aside.
Right.
This should be about what's best for the kids and the community. And I think that happens in a lot of respects. People will, what's in it for me, or how does this affect me and how my life is? But I mean, that's the world we live in. So.
Right. And I think that's the big thing, man. I think a lot of times with especially with youth sports and high school sports and these travel league, AAU leagues, I think a lot of the adults are taking the fun out of the game, right? I was having a conversation with one of my other former teammates. And, back in the day when we played with Boo, Boo went around and recruited, right? So you didn't call Boo to play. I mean, he went around, he heard of kids, he went around, he scouted, and he brought you on to try out on his team. It wasn't, all right, well, you're going to have to go over here and pay $3,000 or $4,000 to be able to join this travel league team. And then you pay me $5,000, then I'm going to tell you your kid can play, right? It's like, it's too much money going around. I think a lot of it is money driven. Well,
and what you're saying, people that are paying, and I've had parents ask me, I need to go to this camp, this I'm like, first of all, if your budget doesn't allow that, and your kid's not being recruited already by Division I schools, you're throwing a lot of money in the trash. You're wasting a lot of money.
Right.
And honestly, you need to look at other options. And I said, listen, go to your own high school coaches. Well, I don't like so and so because he's not playing my son. No. Go to them. They have connections with coaches and ask advice. Is this camp worth me going to? Is this comment? Because if you're spending $150 for a camp that nobody's seeing something for, it's not in your child's best interest. And get them on some of those campuses. Now, if your kid is 5'11" and 215 pounds and he's an offensive lineman, undersized, he shouldn't be going to, I mean, no disrespect to Penn State, but your kid should be looking more at the Division III schools than
right. Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
So don't be spending your money. Like, if they're recruiting your kids seriously, you're going to know it.
Right.
And I think that's generally, and you know this too from your days, and I think it's changed to a certain extent in particular cases. But if you're a football player and by senior year, senior film almost these days is irrelevant because they're looking at juniors. It's
right.
almost like that junior film is the bigger deal. And in basketball, it's a lot of it's, through what's happening in AAU and what travel team you're on, because you mentioned Boo Williams and, Team Takeover, Team Loaded, some of the bigger name teams. You have some of these teams that pop up you never heard of before. Half the roster's gone in 2 weeks. Right. It's like, and the one that gets me is I'll take a picture because I go out to a lot of these different events for high school, AAU, 7-on-7. I'll take a kid's picture, and I've got a photo of that prospect or player with 3 different AAU teams and 2 different high school teams. Or it's like, which one am I using?
Right.
Who you with? Who are you affiliated with? What's
right.
your associated?
Right.
Yeah, you played
right.
for this high school, and this travel team. And then you see some that go play in a team camp for another school. And it's like, what are we doing?
Right.
Yeah, what are we doing?
Right. I totally agree. And it's funny because we were playing AAU league, it's funny because we all was on the same team, Plex, David Macklin, all of us on the same team. And we, talking about playing 2 sports. All of us played football, right? All of us played football. So it was like, it's like almost like we switched from, playing football, going to change and put on our basketball uniforms. And now we're traveling on these little, minivans with Boo Williams going to Richmond or going to New York and playing in basketball tournaments. And it was a lot of fun though.
I would take you guys in the football game, but if I put you in the Wayback Machine, the simulator on Xbox or PS4, and had to make you go against the Boo Williams team with, I think it was Iverson, Alonzo, Joe Smith, J.R. Reed, Cornell Parker, and some of them. I don't know that you guys might hang in there for a little bit, but that would be a hard team to beat. I think the old Lake Taylor coach Kenny Brown was on that team too. By the way, that was a good team. I hear that was allegedly the best of the best. So
it's funny, man. We was the 14-year-old team. I think Iverson was on the 15 or 16-year-old team, and Boo used to put the 14-year-old team in the tournaments with the 16-year-old teams. And I remember we was in a tournament. It was like, you got 2 teams. He was like, yeah, this 14. It was like, you put the 14-year-old team in the tournament with the 16. He said, oh, you'll see when that ball snap. Like, just don't worry about it. So, but we used to have a good time, man. A lot of memories, a lot of good guys. So
that's cool. That's really good.
Definitely, man. Appreciate it. I know you're busy today. You got a lot of stuff going on. Really appreciate you coming on. Anything I can help you with, just let me know. And I definitely keep in touch with you.
Hey, James, this was fun. Let's do it again sometime. Definitely keep in touch. Look forward to chatting again with you sometime, and all the best.
All right. Appreciate it, buddy. Thanks, man.
You bet. Have a good one.
All right.